want to thank Joan, Kang, Shin, and Polina Vinogradova for Polina, I should mention, is the chair-elect of the Teacher Education Interest section. So she will be becoming chair-elect in 2 months at the convention and will be chair in 2025, I think, if my math is correct. And so I want to just acknowledge that. And I don't have the Zoom, actual participants in front of me, but if there's anyone else here from Teacher Education Interest section, just acknowledge yourself at this moment, maybe unmute your mic. And if not, I'll just turn it over to Polina and Joan, and thanking them again for their time this morning and this wonderful discussion ahead of us. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Polina. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Good morning. Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I saw you posting in the chat that we have a wonderfully diverse group from all around the world. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're absolutely thrilled to be able to talk about our work that we care so deeply about. And while the book came out now 2 years ago, kind of during the pandemic, we didn't really get a chance to kind of really talk about the book and engage with the audience. So we really appreciate this opportunity and hope that this will be a useful discussion. We're very grateful to Routledge, as they will provide a free copy to the winner of our raffle. And I know, Joan, you've already posted, right, the link. So what we're going to do is there's a link to Google form. So please, if you want to be considered for a free copy of our book, sign up. It just asks for your full name and your email address. And at the end of the talk, we'll do the raffle and we'll contact the winner. We'll announce the winner and contact the winner, and the publisher will mail you the book and we'll get your mailing address via email. So that's our kind of plan for today. So we'll talk for about 30 minutes and then we'll leave time for questions and discussion. So as James said, our talk today is exploring contemporary foundations for teaching English as an additional language. That is the focus of our edited volume. And since we're doing this talk for the teacher education interest section, we're really focusing on implications for teacher education. And we'll show some ways on how we use this book in our own courses when we work with TESOL candidates. So here's the raffle information. Joan, I think you taking over now.
Oh, right. So I did put the link in there. So hopefully everyone can take a moment to fill it out if you would like a free copy. And then at the end of the presentation, we will pick a name and then let you know who the winner is. So that'll give you incentive to stick through the presentation all the way to the end. All right. So why don't we start on the next slide, which is about the book Vision. And Polina and I worked on this for, I think, 2 years. It really was a labor of love. We met every Friday to work on it. And the first part, of course, with working with Routledge was to develop our book vision. And so our vision for this book is really the integration of a number of themes in the field of education and specifically teaching English to speakers of other languages. And our book emphasizes the importance of critical participatory pedagogies that embrace multilingualism and multimodality in the field of TESOL. And when developing the foundations for this book, Polina and I felt that social justice and advocacy were also central to what TESOL is really all about, or should be about. So we also wanted to make sure that this is not only for classroom teachers addressing the needs of their multilingual learners, right, in their classrooms, but also for our approach and vision for the book, meaning that we also wanted to develop this book with other authors who were diverse scholars and practitioners in the field of language teacher education. So we wanted to make sure we were reaching out across the globe and gave a chance for both scholars and practitioners to be able to have their voices and their experiences brought to the forefront of our field. So if we just go back to, thanks. So what we really wanted to do was to bring together these diverse scholars and practitioners to build a global perspective and to bring to the service diverse voices, diverse contexts, and also many different case studies coming from classrooms in order to explore how critical participatory pedagogies translate into English language teaching and teacher education around the world. So we feature educators implementing innovative approaches in primary, secondary, tertiary contexts across borders. And, because we organize the units around different pedagogies, we wanted to include case studies that were also exemplary demonstrations of each pedagogy, and often actually a combination, right? It's not like one case study implements one type of pedagogy. We really found that most of them were really combining all these different pedagogies and could even be examples in every single thematic unit. But we believe we've succeeded in bridging that theory to practice. And I think that is always the challenge in teacher education, especially with pre-service teachers who may not have had the experience in the classroom to make those connections on their own. It can be very hard. So hopefully this book is great for pre-service teachers as well as in-service teachers and teacher educators like you. So now let's take a look at some of the thematic units that comprise our volume. So you can see, I didn't include the first unit, which is an introduction to teaching English as an additional language in the 21st century. That was my unit. And it just gives the framework for these different themes that we see here. So listed here on the slide are the 9 thematically organized units that demonstrate the language teaching pedagogy, that we need to embed them in larger sociocultural contexts of teaching and learning to be successful. And each unit covers one pedagogical approach and then includes 3 case studies. So if you take a look here, you can read them on your own, but I'll just name a few, right? Critical pedagogy, postmethod, culturally responsive pedagogy, translingualism, multiliteracies, collaborative technologies in TESOL, digital literacy, advocacy, as well as teacher education. So what you can see there is the title of the chapter that is discussing the theoretical foundations of the pedagogical approach. And then each one of these has 3 different case studies. So why don't we take a look at some examples of those? Yeah, so I'll just give you one example, and this comes from Unit 5 on translingualism in TESOL. So this gives you an idea of how the chapters are set up. Okay, so first, we have the author of the chapter that presents translingualism in teaching of English, and that is Dr. Eunjun Lee. And her chapter reviews the most recent developments and discusses translingualism in teaching English as an additional language. It focuses on the understanding and the applications of translingualism as relevant to English language and literacy education. So she's really showing how translingualism problematizes that monolingual ideology and the implications of reconceptualizing how we learn and teach English within our students' multilingual realities, where language difference is a norm rather than a deficit, which is how she puts it so well in her chapter. And then in this unit, then we have 3 case studies that exemplify this by showing how to enact translanguaging pedagogy in an intensive higher education English language class. That's the first one, by encouraging students to choose and research a character of historical and social importance in their own culture and language. And so this is that first one that is by Katya and Joan, case study 5.1. And so here, students have the freedom to research and prepare their project in both their native language and in English. The next case study, which is by Sarah Knowles. I don't know if Sarah's here. If so, say hello. But this case study focuses on translingual use of adult learners, L1 in Spanish and L2 in English, and their development of English language and literacy practices through translingual board work, note-taking, language awareness activities, and reflection. And the third case study, which comes from Korea with Young-Joo Yi and Jin-Shil Jang. This one is a fascinating example from South Korea, where the Koryo-in children, who are ethnic Koreans who've migrated to Korea from post-Soviet states, engage in translingual practices while learning English as an additional language in South Korea. And this is such a wonderful case study that is with children. So you see, we have it from different contexts, different age groups, hopefully exemplifying how translingualism is applied in TESOL. So that's one unit. Polina, do you want to take it away and introduce another of our thematic units?
Sure, thank you, Joan. Yes, another unit, kind of slightly different. Multiliteracies in TESOL, we're kind of moving towards the use of technology, multimodalities here. And again, a wonderful theoretical chapter, a pedagogy of multiliteracies and its role in English language education that Shakina Rajendram wrote, where she offers a very nice review of historical development of a pedagogy of multiliteracies by the New London Group, of the four major parameters that define a pedagogy of multiliteracies, and how actually Kopp and Kalantzis evolved further these parameters, and also talks about implication of a pedagogy of multiliteracies for English language education for TESOL. And this theoretical chapter is illustrated also by three diverse and very different case studies. Two case studies are from the United States, both from K-12, but one by Brian TESOL is from a case study with high school students that he did in New York City in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he took his students who were recent arrivals to the United States, and they looked at art to spark conversation about art from a critical lens. So this is very interesting that this is a great example of enacting a pedagogy of multiliteracies and its four parameters without actually using technology. So fantastic example, very practical suggestions that anybody can really use in their teaching. The second case study is by Natalia Ward and Amber Warren, is with elementary students, so with young learners, with the use of technology, and it shows how they use Google Earth application and how students in their classes, multilingual learners in their classes, compose stories of migration and immigration, and stories of migration, immigration of their families, and mapped all of these stories on Google Earth, and that showed this really rich, diverse collection of students' stories and the stories of their families using Google Earth. The third case study is from Japan by David Dalsky and Junyun Su, which is quite different. It was done in a university in Japan where they had a project rapping on campus. So they wrote rap, and it was an extracurricular project for them. So students at the university in Japan who were learning English, they just signed up to do that outside of regular classes, and they had quite a sizable group and very interesting project. And again, they show how they scaffolded the students through four parameters of a pedagogy of multiliteracies, and what were the product, the rap that the students composed as a result of this work. So really quite fascinating. And again, it is a great example of how you take such complex theoretical concept, right, as a pedagogy of multiliteracies, as translanguaging, as critical pedagogy, as postmethod, and how teachers around the world in different contexts translate that into their teaching in different ways. And we think that this is one of the struggles that usually we observe TESOL candidates have, because in my classes they would say, well, this is a great concept, this is fascinating, this is so interesting, but how do we actually do that? So we really wanted in our book to show how can you actually do that with your students. Of course, as we said, that today we have this focus on teacher education and how to use this book in teacher education with teacher candidates. So the book kind of opens with Joan's chapter when Joan frames 21st century learning for us. And then my chapter on preparing teacher candidates or preparing fellow TESOLers for participatory teaching wraps up the book. And in my chapter, all of the chapters that come before, they inform my argument for participatory teaching in teacher education, for modeling all of these concepts to our teachers in our own, to our TESOL candidates, right, pre-service and in-service teacher, in our own teaching and work with them. So I discuss how critical pedagogy, how participatory pedagogy, post-method, teacher identity and learner identity. We do not have a separate chapter in the book on teacher and learner identity, but there's a fantastic special issue volume in TESOL journal that Bedrutin Yazan and Kristen Lindell edited in 2019 that offers rich discussions on TESOL identity, teacher identity, and learner identity. And I bring that up in my chapter as well and talk about its importance in teacher education. And then I kind of discuss how we ourselves can be transformative intellectuals and how we can prepare our students to be transformative intellectuals, following Kumorova-Develo's kind of in his post-method discussion. He has these 3 parameters: teacher as a passive technician, teacher as a reflective practitioner, and then teacher as a transformative intellectual. So we definitely hope that this book and these theoretical chapters and case studies will help us all to kind of become and be transformative intellectuals. And with my students, I often say that I don't see it as a permanent state. I see it as a constant learning, kind of becoming a transformative intellectual, because I'm worried that if we say we've become, we kind of stop learning. So that's at least my vision and take, and I discuss that. And what we would like also to do today is to show how we in our 2 classes, in our kind of 2 universities, in our classes, we use our book. And, you know, we kind of joke sometimes that to a certain degree, a book was, I don't know, a selfish teaching act, as we're really working with TESOL candidates and wanting to bring in all of these critical concepts in our teaching. We always had to draw on different materials, on different textbooks, on different articles, and we really wanted to have it all in one place. And that's how the idea for the book was kind of born. So just examples of some of the activities that we do with our TESOL candidates. So I teach an advanced methods course, English language teaching 3, where the focus of the course is exploring critical pedagogy and post-method. And I also teach a technology course where everything evolves around the pedagogy of multiliteracies. So here's an example from a Padlet activity from my technology course, where we grapple with the concepts of a pedagogy of multiliteracies. So I, and I know Joan as well, we love Padlet. Great tool, right, free of charge, easily accessible tool for kind of mind mapping and brainstorming and student collaboration. And instead of me lecturing and retelling the chapter of Shakina Rajendram and kind of asking questions and getting students just kind of classical, right, discussion, what we do, we get on iPad or on Padlet, and I prepare an assignment. So in this case, you can see that I in advance assigned questions to the student. So the first part is I pull the quotes from Rajendram's chapter that I find to be really important, that I really want them to grapple with and think about. And I put this quote for each student, different quotes. And you can see that instructions are on the left, and I ask them to read the quote from Rajendram and then think, how do you understand it? And then I ask them to paraphrase this quote to explain its meaning. And think also about the keywords that come to mind when they're reading and thinking about this quote. So of course, my hope that they've read the chapter in advance. If they did not read deep enough, they get another chance to think about these concepts. So they work individually, and you see they kind of paraphrase, they put keywords, and then they need to move one person to the right and read the quote that was assigned to their classmate and the paraphrase the classmate offered. And then they need to ask a classmate whose column they're reading one question about their quote and the explanation they provided. So they engage with each other this way. And then they go back, read the question, present their quote, present their paraphrase, and answer the question that was posed by their classmates. So they do this deep critical reflection. They interact with each other. Of course, we carry it further into the case studies and case studies analysis, but they're able to zoom in to quotes and important concepts and think about them at a deeper level and then reflect. And also, I find this activity to be a great model that they can use with their students, right? Because they can pose some type of phrase question. If they're working on paraphrasing, they can get their students to work on paraphrasing this way, identifying keywords, and again, asking each other questions and working with each other and collaborating. So this becomes actually a great example of post-method and a macro strategy of maximizing learning opportunities, for example, of integrating language skills. Some other macro strategies are present here, and critical pedagogy, where they also look deeper and engage in critical reflection. And Joan, I think, right? You're taking over here.
Yes. All right. So that was a really great example. And I'm also going to give you an example from my own experience. But we hope that teacher educators will also find that the approaches in our book are useful to develop their own approaches in the classroom. So what I mean by that, so in my courses for my graduate students in TESOL, I also try to demonstrate the kinds of approaches that I want to encourage in my teacher candidates, and I'm sure you all do as well. So for example, wanting to model teaching strategies and activities with teacher candidates that they can use with their learners. And much like the scholars and the practitioners in our book, we hope it's clear that modeling approaches also means connecting to real world contexts and authentic classroom situations. And of course, the utilization of a problem posing approach and the exploration of our candidates' diverse perspectives is always a must in our coursework. So let me give an example from our own teacher education course. So here you can see this is modeling choice boards while I'm checking comprehension of my students' understanding of my course content. And this is from my graduate TESOL course about language and literacy in global context. So I presented a choice activity for them and giving them a choice for it. And the question I posed, which you can see in there, but I'll read it in case it's too small. The question posed was, how can you motivate and engage your culturally and linguistically diverse students in reading? Use the readings and your knowledge of the CLE student biography to answer this question, and choose one way below to express your answer to the question. So students could create a cartoon, design an infographic, make a short podcast, write a poem, write a song or rap and perform it, or any other creative way that's not a paper or an essay, right? We'd already done, or we do typical academic writing responses to our content. So I wanted my graduate students to experience what it felt like to express themselves and their understandings of the course content in creative ways. And you can see through this that I'm modeling a choice activity with teacher candidates as a model for an approach that they can take with their CLD learners. I'm modeling my own students' development of multiliteracies and multimodal communication. And encouraging through the posting on Padlet collaboration and communication with their peers in the course that leads to that co-construction of new knowledge and collective resources that they can apply to the real world. So let's take a look at the Padlet. Polina and I thought it would be fun to show an example of using the same app. So here you can see this is the Padlet for my course. And these were some of my students' responses. So you can see that they have, created an infographic. There's even a video, and they've expressed their understanding in different ways. How about if we take a look at the video? You can just click on that, Polina. I think it'll be straight to the video. Click on the Padlet in the previous. Yep, there we go. Okay, so that was a cool Powtoon. I love that she even had to empower them with choice in there. So that's one example. And then in the next slide, I also gave you another 2 examples, but really to show that with this Padlet activity, students also decided how they were going to be able to express themselves. So some created something for students, some created tips for teachers. So it was a wonderful way for them to share with each other, and they all gave each other ideas. The other thing that I really loved about this activity, so after they did that and they posted comments on each other's Padlet activities, students got a chance to reflect on this experience. And it was wonderful for me to read their reflections because they really internalized the experience and felt that having these creative ways to express their knowledge actually helped them deepen their understanding of the content. For some of them, it forced them to think like, what's the main idea? What is the most important aspect of this for my colleagues or for my students, as well as to internalize the importance of giving students the power of choice in the classroom. So, Polina, I think we're at the end of our presentation, and I don't know if you have any questions.
Yes, we'll be happy. Questions, comments. Also, we have a discount code for you if you'd like to purchase the book. Routledge provided us with that as well, about which we're very excited. So take note of that. But yeah, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in or post question in the chat. And again, just make sure you've registered for the raffle. Okay, there is a question from Roxana. What platform app do your students use to create videos?
Well, that example I just put in the chat was used by Powtoon. But yeah, my students, sometimes they just create a video using Zoom, sometimes where they're recording themselves in some way. Sometimes they just use their iPhone and create a video right in there using the video app. I'm sure there's tons of different types of apps that you all use as well.
Yeah, I also usually just leave it open to the students and say, you pick whatever you're comfortable with or you want to find. And sometimes they really dig out some very interesting applications that I was unaware of. So that's a great learning for me as well. Yeah. So another, we have a question from Cynthia. Great examples. Thank you, Cynthia. How much time do you allow to complete such activities, and how do you assess them? So this is such a great question. I think the question of assessment when you use post-method or critical pedagogy, kind of its whole aspect. So in my case, these activities I do in class, so I don't technically assess them except for giving feedback. Again, time-wise, for example, I might give 10, 15, if for the paraphrasing activity, if I remember correctly, I would give 10 to 15 minutes for them to think about the quote and paraphrase and write the keywords. And then I would give them 5 minutes when they're switching to read their classmates' work and then pose a question. And then we'll go back and we'll discuss. But there's no kind of formal assessment. It's more of me taking my own mental notes, whether people got it and what concepts might still need some type of, further work and further discussion. So I'll circle back to them in future classes. Or if I see that somebody is struggling, then I'm able to perhaps reach out to the student individually and see what's going on and how they're doing. But also with graduate students, assessment also is quite different, I think, especially in class. Joan, what about you?
Well, for that particular activity, that was a part of their, discussion board participation for that week. So I don't always just use, so we use Blackboard, but I don't always use the threaded discussion in Blackboard. Sometimes I use another app and that is a part of their discussion. In that case, I have a rubric for discussion posts where they're required to do their initial post, which would be that Padlet activity, and then respond to 2 others. In this case, I also wanted them to reflect on the activity that they designed. And so again, that's sort of like a weekly assignment, discussion participation assessed in that way. But I also gave them feedback on the actual content based on what they were expressing were the important aspects from the content of that unit for the week.
Yeah, and I see Burju has raised her hand. Burju, please go ahead. Burju, we're happy to hear from you if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Or you could put your comment into the chat if that's easier.
Right. For some reason, Burju is saying she could make it work. If you can put it in the chat, that'd be great. Yes. So Carol is also talking about a chapter on diverse scholars in diverse contexts in the context of music education. So we actually don't have a separate chapter on diverse scholars in diverse contexts. That was the whole scope of the book, to bring in diverse contexts into the book and bring in diverse scholars. So we wanted to make sure to give this book as a platform for diverse voices from the TESOL field. We very often hear that the kind of like there's the field of TESOL, when we look at who's publishing what and who's writing what, it's kind of skewed and it doesn't really represent the great diversity, global diversity of the field of TESOL. We really wanted to overcome that. And we actually, very purposefully searched and looked for young scholars, rising scholars who work on these issues from across the kind of the field. And definitely you might have seen that for case studies, we had an open call for case studies through TESOL. So we were able to collect diverse voices across the globe. So we can say actually that except for Antarctica, every single continent is represented in this book, which is really very exciting for us. Okay.
Thank you.
So Mahajabin is talking about Jamboard with my students. Yes, I know Joan uses Jamboard also quite extensively. Padlet would be an excellent tool as well. Yes, Padlet is, I think all of these tools are so useful depending on the purposes of that. Okay. So, okay,
yeah,
we have.
I was just gonna say the cool thing about Jamboard is that also you can get anonymous participation, right? So, the class can collaborate and share ideas, but it's not all necessarily something where who's written what. So there's a little bit of anonymity, but sometimes that's can work well for what you're doing.
Yeah, and so Burju wrote us a comment about using Padlet to help students improve their language skills. We hadn't thought about theoretical courses. So we're glad that this example was useful, because that was actually the purpose, to show how we can work with theory. And, just it's kind of interesting, because I think during the pandemic, when we were teaching, and, we teach theoretical courses that we also bring in practice to. And when we were teaching completely online, that was kind of what we grappled with. So how can we do productive and engaging activities with our students online? And I think that a lot of things that we've been doing were also born out of that. And we're just now carrying through while we are in face-to-face classes. It is still such a great resource and such a great engagement for the students, which I also noticed that some students who might not be as eager to speak in class, they're more comfortable engaging this way as well. Yeah. Okay, Heather has a question for us. And by the way, so Heather is a contributor to the book. Heather Linville on advocacy wrote a great chapter on advocacy. I saw Ilka Koska here as well, who wrote a wonderful chapter on the use of technology in TESOL. So thank you. And here's a question from Heather. I was wondering if you have any more examples of a particular case study you used and how. Joan, do you have anything?
Actually, the chapter that I've been using the most has been from what Polina introduced in the multiliteracies, and mainly because I have found that, that this notion of integrating multiliteracies into the teaching of language is something that is still like a little bit new, right? For the teachers that I've been working with. So I've actually found that to be really helpful in order to show some examples of how that works in the classroom. I don't know about you, Polina.
Yeah, I use basically the whole book in 2 courses, kind of, splitting it between technology and other critical approaches. One of the unit that stands out to me is on translanguaging. And I see that TESOL candidates really struggle with that. It's very interesting because like in our program, as I'm sure in many TESOL programs, we have a philosophy of multilingualism. We're moving students from talking about English language learners, or English as a foreign, English as a second language, to English as an additional language, to multilingual learners, to come from this asset approach. And we talk a lot about how home language and the languages that's other than English, what a great resource they are for English language education and for our students, whether they are in a kind of classical ESL context or EFL context. And generally, our students understand that and agree with us and see the value, but they again struggle with translating that into their classes. So my class is very multilingual. So how do I actually, and I don't speak their languages except for maybe Spanish or maybe Mandarin. So how do I translate that? How do I construct an activity when they're going to be using a language and I don't know what they're talking about? So I use the chapter on translanguaging, and I use the case studies. And I usually ask, depending on the size of the class, I usually ask the students to there's a designated group responsible for each case study, and they present main concepts, and then they present the case study and explain how exactly translingualism was enacted in this case study. What type of activity has the author done? And then in my class, they're also doing a teaching practicum at the same time. So they are shadowing an instructor. They're observing classes in Washington, D.C. metro area, some of them teaching their own classes. So then I ask them to think, so in your practicum context, how exactly can you implement this, let's say next week or in 2 weeks? What can you do? How can you sort of copy certain aspects from this case study and enact it in your teaching? And they come up with some fascinating ideas, and they try out some of the activities, and then they come and they say, this is amazing. This actually worked. or this worked, but I need to tweak it and do something. So they really see the model and they're able to use this as a model in their own teaching. So that's how I have been using the chapters and case studies as well. And then we also have a question for Amabel. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. So did you find any challenges with the implementation and exploration of critical pedagogy and other critical approaches? I think that that's always the challenge, that students say, you know, great ideas or eye-opening, or I've never thought of this, or if they themselves experienced marginalization as English language learners, as teachers, as people of color, as multilingual individuals, you know, they really are attuned with the concepts that are in critical pedagogy, but then still struggle how to implement that. So case studies just become great examples for that. Joan, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Well, I was also going to say before too that because the case studies in each of the chapters, they're really great examples of, you know, all these different, you know, pedagogies, you know, throughout the book. It's not just limited to one. And so the really great thing about also having like in different types of contexts and also ones that are examples of multiple different pedagogies is it's useful. Let's say you happen to have students who are, you know, teaching K-12, but then you also have some teaching the adult world, that it's a way that you can be able to learn how to, I guess, or demonstrate how these different pedagogies can be used in the different contexts. So that was from before. I just wanted to mention that, right? Because they're interrelated, right? Many of them are great examples of multiple types of pedagogies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see multiple comments here saying that this is really interesting and useful. Thank you so much that you find this useful and interesting. And yes, I hope that you'll get a chance. Also, Routledge is wonderful because there's an ebook online. I know if you are at the university, it is possible that your library has it. It is also possible to request your library to purchase the ebook, and I know that at AU, as soon as I requested, AU did that. So my students actually have free access, and faculty have free access to our book, which is also great because we definitely want our work to be easily accessible to anybody who's interested and find it useful. Yeah. Heather's asking, will there be a second version? Can we encourage anyone to think about their own case studies and could write it up? Sure, I think that'd be great if we can do a second edition in a couple years and kind of add to that and add more diverse voices to case studies. I think that would be fantastic. Yes.
Great idea.
Give us more work. Okay. Is there any other questions or comments? I think we have, what, 10 minutes, 13 minutes, right, James?
Yeah, we have 13 minutes, but you know, what doesn't.
Well, website for Routledge. Joan, do you think you could add the website for Routledge into the chat?
Polina, and yeah, I'm unmuted. Make sure you do that. Could you talk more about Polina and Joan, the use of this, say, in English as a foreign language context, and how it might translate outside of, say, the U.S. and a K-12 teacher preparation program that many folks are working in? There's so many folks that are training English language teachers overseas. Do you see how it might play out differently, you know, similarly, et cetera? Maybe you could just talk about that, or how we could highlight the English as a foreign language aspect to that, which I think you talked about at the beginning, because obviously we're trying to bring into voice. You mentioned the idea of diverse voices in this book. So just, you know, if there was a thought or two on that.
Yeah, Joan, do you want to take this?
Sure. And actually, I put in the link to the Routledge page. And if you do take a look at it, you will clearly see, in the table of contents that we really have a diverse range, including, English as a foreign language. We use teaching English as an additional language, right? Because we are talking about global context. It's not just US based. And so we have many examples from Japan, from Mexico, from Turkey, right? From Thailand, Argentina, Serbia. I'm just literally reading down the list. So if you keep going down, you will see even diverse areas of the United States as well. So it was really important to us to not just be in US based, also, primary, secondary, tertiary. We really did try to address these contemporary approaches beyond the US based K-12 classroom in order to make this as useful as possible and to the widest range of TESOL teacher preparation programs, whether it be for pre-service or in-service.
Yeah, every single unit is illustrated by at least one case study from a sort of AFL setting. It might not always be K-12. There are a number of university cases as well, but there is this presence, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about something like translanguaging and how that presents in a situation where the students are not necessarily a diverse range of languages, where there might be a group where there's you mentioned in your own classes at American, where there's many different languages present with the teacher candidates, and how something like that might look different in an environment where students are teaching English as a foreign language. Just wondering if you could, unfortunately, I don't have a copy of your book in front of me. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that and how that's approached in that idea, for example, of translanguage, which is so prominent in TESOL these days, how that looks in in an English as a foreign language environment, where you're training teachers who are going to be working with, one language of learners, because they're teaching English in Japan, for example, how that, and you're training teachers to work with those learners, how that looks.
I think that's a great point, right? Because also, of course, our EFL kind of case study for translanguaging on Karasaram children, right? It's slightly different. Of course, they're all they're all Russian speakers in South Korea, learning Korean, or some of them are speakers of Korean and learning English at the same time. And the authors show how the bringing in Russian and bring in English and Korean helps them in acquiring two new languages. One is kind of completely new English, and one they might have some familiarity through as a heritage language, right? Korean, and they are immigrants to South Korea. I think that what all other case studies and the chapter itself shows is the purposefulness that's useful, I would think, in any English language environment. If we think about EFL, the purposefulness of integration and presence of the home language, or of L1 if we're thinking about EFL, right? The fact that we welcome the language in the classroom, that we really find kind of English only movements are not productive or useful. And the case studies show that there is much more language learning that happens when home languages are present. So purposefulness, kind of methodological soundness of that, right? Carefully thinking what is the benefit of integrating home language, or the presence of home language. I think these are probably the main learning outcomes, I would say, from the chapter and the case studies that I can think of off the top of my head right now.
And in that particular case study, and in many of them, there's actual like photos and images of products from those classrooms and case studies. So in that example, you can see actually the signage that the teachers were using in the classroom, some examples of student products that use multiple languages, along with the explanations of how to enact a translanguaging pedagogy in that context. So that's another thing we tried very hard to do, is to put in images and examples and products wherever we were able to.
Yeah. Okay, and somebody already got access through a university to the book. So great, congratulations. That is wonderful. So I think it's time to do the raffle, Joan, huh? And announce the winner.
Yes, I even put the person's name who is our winner on the last slide. So I was able to go in there, put it in. So the raffle winner is.
Oh, it doesn't show anything to me. Hold on.
To the next slide.
Here we go. Yes.
It's Anastasia Girhanivska. I hope.
Girhanivska, yes.
Yay.
Anastasia, congratulations.
Anastasia, yay.
We have your email address, so we will reach out to you for your mailing address. So Routledge will send the copy of our book directly to you. And to everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure to share our work with all of you and to have this great productive conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, Joan and Polina, for all of your effort this morning and bringing this really terrific webinar to the TEIS group. I really appreciate it. And I want to remind folks that we will have another TEIS webinar in 1 month, actually 1 month exactly from today, on Monday, the 13th of February, from 1 to 2 in the afternoon Eastern time, with Laura Becker, who is a past chair of TEIS, and Beth Clark Garcia at Binghamton University, and Laura Becker is at Hunter in New York City. And they will be talking about using authentic writing samples in the TESOL teacher education program. And this will be a really interesting discussion. So how we can bring authentic student writing into TESOL teacher education. So I hope you can plan to join us for that. There'll be an announcement on the TESOL boards in a few weeks for that. But again, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you again to Joan and Polina. And I want to also acknowledge Heather Linville, who's here this afternoon as well with us. Heather is the incoming chair. She'll be the chair starting in March of TEIS. And of course, Polina is the chair-elect, will be the chair-elect starting in March. So thank you all again, Joan and Polina and everyone else for joining us. And I hope to see you again in a month when we have Laura and Beth discussing authentic writing. And I wish you all a great afternoon. So I think, Polina, you're controlling this, so you can just end the discussion for the rest of us, and have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful weekend ahead, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.